Excuse me, ma'am. Please, can you tell me where platform 14 is? Desmond's voice cracked as he shifted the strap of a duffel bag that had lost its buckle years ago, the canvas held together now with a shoelace threaded through the seam. His other arm cradled his 7-year-old sister against his chest, her forehead damp and much too warm, her small body heavy with sleep that wasn't really sleep at all. Vivian glanced up from her tablet, ready to point and move on. Then he told her where they were headed. The name hit her like a fist to the chest. The tablet nearly slipped from her hand because that name, that building, she had spent 6 years trying not to think about it. And what happened next didn't just change his life. It cracked open a wound she thought she had sealed for good. Join me as we get into this one. Trust me, by the time you find out why this woman gave up a business-class sleeper car and a 9-figure acquisition meeting to follow a stranger she'd known for 90 seconds, you'll understand something about grief that no amount of money can buy your way out of. But before we get into it, I want to say something. When I started making these videos, people close to me said I was wasting my time, that nobody would sit through a story like this, that I should quit and go find something more sensible to do with my evenings. I'd love for you and me to prove them wrong together. If you haven't already, hit subscribe, drop a like, and send this one to somebody who needs a reminder that strangers can still show up for each other. Now, let's go back to that morning. 6:11 in the morning, Union Station, Chicago. The Metropolitan Lounge was hushed in the particular way that expensive rooms are hushed, all soft carpet and softer lighting, an espresso machine hissing quietly behind the counter, the murmur of a news channel playing with the sound turned almost all the way down on a screen nobody was watching. Vivian Calloway sat in a wingback chair near the tall windows, her cream wool coat folded over the armrest, her reading glasses pushed up into steel gray hair that she wore short and unfussy, the kind of haircut that said she had stopped, years ago, needing anyone's approval of how she looked. A cup of chamomile tea cooled untouched on the side table beside her, a thin film already forming across the surface. Her phone lit up every few minutes with a soft buzz, and each time she answered the same way, even unhurried, giving nothing away. Tell them the offer stands until Friday at noon and not 1 hour longer. She ended the call without saying goodbye, the way she ended most calls, and set the phone face down on her knee as if it had done something to disappoint her. That was Vivian, 54 years old, founder and sole owner of the Calloway Collection, a string of 22 boutique hotels scattered across 3 countries, each one designed to feel like nobody else had ever stayed in the room before you. Trade magazines called her the quiet queen of hospitality because in 19 years of running the company, she had never once given a televised interview, never walked a step of red carpet, and had been photographed smiling in public exactly 4 times, all of them before she turned 40. Her employees knew her as a woman who noticed everything, a chipped tile in a lobby in Lisbon, a mispriced breakfast menu in a property in Austin, and said nothing about any of it until the exact right moment, when she would deliver the corrections so precisely that nobody ever felt scolded, only seen. To the people who worked for her, Vivian Calloway was a woman who had built an empire out of exacting standards and total self-containment. What none of them knew was what she carried in the inside pocket of her coat. A small wooden train, no bigger than a matchbox, its red paint chipped along one edge, where small fingers had once worn it smooth. She never took it out in front of anyone. She never even looked at it in front of anyone. But every morning before she put her coat on, her fingers found it and pressed once, just to be sure it was still there, the way another person might check for their keys. The train had belonged to her son. Toby Calloway had died 6 years ago. He was 8 years old. A heart condition called dilated cardiomyopathy had weakened his heart muscle slowly, and then all at once, stealing his stamina first, then his breath, then finally the rhythm itself, until one October evening in a hospital room in Portland, his small chest simply stopped rising. Vivian had been holding his hand. She had felt his fingers go soft in hers, watched the monitor flatten into a single unbroken tone, and understood in that instant that the rest of her life was now going to be divided into before that sound and after it. She remembered, even now, the strange detail that had lodged itself in her memory from that night, not the doctors, not the machines, but the fact that it had been raining outside the window, and that some absurd, disconnected part of her mind had thought, He loved the rain. He's going to be so upset he missed it. Before Toby died, Vivian had already committed $11 million to building a pediatric cardiac wing at Cascade Children's Hospital in Portland, the hospital that had cared for him for 4 years. She had named it the Toby Calloway Pediatric Cardiac Center. She had stood at the ribbon cutting with her son on her hip, his oxygen cannula tucked behind his ears, his small hand slapping against hers as the ribbon fell, laughing at the noise the scissors made more than anything else happening around him. He'd worn a small blue bow tie that day that he had picked out himself, insisting it matched the hospital's logo, and he had told every single nurse who came near him that this was his building now, his name was on it, and they had all laughed and told him yes, it certainly was. He'd been 6 then. Still laughing. Still asking for one more bedtime chapter. Still, impossibly, alive. After the funeral, Vivian never went back to Portland. Not once in 6 years. Not for the hospital's anniversary galas. Not for the annual report photos the board kept asking her to appear in. Not even for the plaque rededication ceremony the hospital's development office had gently, then less gently, requested her presence at 3 separate times. The building stood there with her son's name cut into limestone above the entrance, and she could not make herself walk through those doors, because walking through those doors meant agreeing that he was really gone, that the building had outlived the boy it was named for. Vivian Calloway had built empires on decisiveness. This was the one decision, the only one in 19 years of running a company, that she had simply refused to make. Her husband, Marcus, had tried to hold what was left of their marriage together. He tried for nearly 3 years, longer than most people would have, longer than Vivian herself had believed possible in the darkest months. He had suggested therapy, and they had gone, together for times, sitting 6 inches apart on a beige couch, while a kind woman with a soft voice asked them questions neither of them could answer honestly. He had suggested a trip, just the 2 of them, somewhere with no hospital within driving distance, and they had gone, and it had been the loneliest week of Vivian's life. Worse somehow than being alone, because it meant watching someone else's face grieve differently than hers did, and finding that she resented him for it. Resented him for crying at dinner while she sat dry-eyed across the table. Resented him for going quiet for entire days while she filled hers with phone calls she didn't need to make. Grief doesn't always draw 2 people closer. Sometimes it drives a wall straight down the center of a house, and each person ends up standing on their own side of it, drowning in an identical current, but somehow unable to reach across. Marcus had asked for the divorce on a rainy Sunday in their kitchen, the same kind of rain that had been falling the night Toby died, and Vivian had wondered, briefly, cruelly, whether he'd chosen the weather on purpose. She signed the papers a week later, without a single objection. She didn't have the energy left to fight for anything that wasn't printed on a balance sheet, so she poured herself into the company instead. Site visits at dawn, board calls past midnight, acquisitions, renovations, quarterly projections. She filled every waking hour with numbers because the alternative was silence, and in the silence, she could still hear Toby asking her to read the dinosaur book one more time before lights out, could still hear the particular way he mispronounced the word triceratops, and had refused to be corrected on it right up until the end. She hadn't cried since the funeral. She had made very sure of that, had built her entire daily architecture, the calls, the meetings, the constant motion, around the simple mechanical fact that stillness was where the crying lived, and so she never allowed herself to be still. Now she sat in the Metropolitan Lounge, waiting on a train west to Seattle, where she was set to close on a boutique property overlooking the Sound, the largest single acquisition of her career. 18 months of negotiation reduced to a single signature she was due to provide at 4 o'clock the following afternoon. Her assistant had booked her into the last private roomette on the sleeper car, the way she always traveled, alone, the small enclosed compartment she had come to prefer over any wider space, because a small space, she had found, was easier to fill entirely with work. Vivian checked the delicate watch on her wrist, a thin gold band that had been a gift from Marcus in a year she no longer let herself think about. 6:19. Boarding would begin in just under 40 minutes. She lifted the tea, took a sip, set it back down. Cold. She didn't mind. Around her the lounge murmured with the low clatter of laptop keys and the occasional low laugh from someone's video call, a woman near the window speaking softly in French into a headset, a man in the corner reviewing what looked like architectural blueprints. Nobody in that room looked at anybody else. That was the arrangement money bought you: space, quiet, privacy, and if you weren't careful, a very well-appointed kind of isolation. Vivian Calloway was, at that moment, the loneliest person in the station. She simply hadn't noticed yet. 2 concourses away, in the general boarding hall, an entirely different world was in motion. The air was thicker down there, louder, full of rolling suitcase wheels and crying toddlers and a departures board that clacked over every few minutes, with a sound like a shuffled deck of cards. Somewhere a vendor was calling out coffee and pretzels, and the whole hall smelled like fried dough and floor wax, and a few hundred people's cologne, all fighting for the same 6 inches of air. A busker near the escalators was playing something on an acoustic guitar that nobody was tipping for. Announcements echoed off the high-tiled ceiling every 90 seconds or so, garbled just enough that half the hall had to strain to catch their own platform number. Desmond Okafor stood near the center of it, squinting up at the departures board like it had been printed in a language he only half remembered. His eyes moved across the platform numbers and the boarding times, but none of it was landing, not really, because underneath the reading he was doing the other math he'd been doing for 5 months straight, the math of $290 against 3 days in an unfamiliar city. He had never taken a long-distance train before. He had never had a reason to until now. He hitched Aaliyah higher against his hip, resettling her weight the way he'd learned to do without waking her, a motion so practiced by now it barely registered as effort. She was 7 but small for it, the kind of small that made strangers guess 5, her wrists thin enough that he could circle one with his thumb and forefinger and still have room to spare. Her arms hung loosely around his neck, her cheek pressed to his collarbone, her breath coming in short, uneven pulls that he counted without meaning to, the way he'd counted her breaths every night for 6 years, an old and useless habit that never once made the counting stop. Her skin against his neck was hot in a way that made something twist low in his stomach every time he checked it, which was constantly, his free hand drifting up every few minutes to press the back of 2 fingers briefly against her forehead. His free hand gripped the duffel with a shoelace holding the zipper shut, the bag digging a groove into his shoulder that he'd stopped noticing hours ago. Inside was everything he had judged necessary for a trip he genuinely could not afford. 3 changes of clothes for Aaliyah, 1 for himself, because he'd have laundry done on his own clothes if it came to that before he'd spend money on more of them, her pill bottles rubber-banded together inside a sandwich bag, carvedilol and lisinopril and furosemide, names he could recite faster than his own social security number by now, a small stuffed elephant with one ear chewed soft from years of being slept on, and a folder, corners gone round from handling, holding 6 years of her medical history, every echocardiogram report, every discharge summary, every referral letter he'd learned to keep organized because no 2 doctors' offices ever seemed to talk to each other, and somebody had to be the one holding the whole picture. He looked lost because he was lost. A transit officer walked past, and Desmond opened his mouth to ask, but the man was already gone, murmuring into a shoulder radio about something on the far platform. A woman in a long coat clicked by without glancing over, her eyes fixed somewhere past him. A cluster of college kids laughed their way toward a platform, backpacks bouncing, phones out, utterly unbothered by the size of the world around them in a way that struck Desmond, for just a second, as its own kind of luxury. Nobody stopped. Desmond shifted Aaliyah again. His arms burned. His lower back had gone past aching into something closer to numb. But he kept scanning the board, trying to find the letters that would lead him to platform 14, running his thumb once, absently, over the strap of the duffel, a small anchoring motion he wasn't even aware he did anymore. That's when he saw her. A woman in a cream coat standing near the corridor that connected the concourses, tablet in hand, but with the unmistakable posture of someone who had done this 1,000 times before, shoulders set, feet planted, the specific stillness of somebody who has never actually lost anywhere, someone who might spare 30 seconds to point him the right way. Desmond crossed toward her, his broken duffel thumping against his hip with every step, rehearsing the sentence in his head the way he'd been rehearsing small requests to strangers his whole adult life. Keep it short. Keep it polite. Don't make it their problem. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said. "Could you help me find platform 14? I've never done one of these long trips before, and I can't make sense of this board." Vivian looked up from the tablet. She saw a young man, exhausted eyes rimmed faintly red from what was probably days of bad sleep, clothes clean but worn thin at the seams in the way that spoke of careful, repeated washing rather than neglect, a child asleep, or something like asleep, against his shoulder. She opened her mouth to give quick directions and get back to her messages, the words already half-formed: "Straight down that way. Past the pretzel stand. You can't miss it." Then Aaliyah stirred. She turned her face into Desmond's collar and let out a thin, small sound, the particular sound a child makes when pain drags them halfway out of sleep, but they're too tired to fully cry. A small, broken little noise, barely audible over the noise of the hall, the kind of sound that most people in that station would never even register. Vivian went still. She knew that sound. She had heard it 100 times in hospital corridors, in the back seat of a car speeding toward an emergency entrance at 2 a.m, the sound Toby used to make when his chest would tighten and his lips would go the wrong color, and he was too worn down to do anything but whimper against her shoulder while she drove with one hand and held him with the other. That sound lived somewhere in Vivian's chest like an old scar that had never quite closed, a scar she had gotten extremely good at not touching. She looked at the girl properly for the first time, not the polite half-glance she'd give any stranger's child, but a real, searching look. Sunken cheeks. A grayish undertone beneath warm brown skin, the specific pallor of a body working too hard for too long. Eyes that fluttered open for half a second, glassy, unfocused with fever, then slid shut again. Small for her age, too small, the particular fragility that healthy children simply do not carry, a fragility Vivian's body seemed to recognize a full beat before her mind did. Vivian's throat closed. "Is she all right?" Desmond managed something close to a smile, the specific kind of smile people learn to wear when the truth is too heavy to say out loud in a crowded room, a smile with nothing behind it but muscle memory. "She will be. We're headed out to Portland. She's got an appointment at the Children's Hospital there. The Heart Center." Vivian's hand went still around the tablet, her knuckles paling slightly against the case. "Which one?" "The one at Cascade Children's," Desmond said, adjusting Aaliyah's weight without seeming to notice he'd done it. "The pediatric heart place. I think it's named after somebody. The Callaway Center or something close to that." He said it the way a person says the name of a place they've only ever seen typed on a referral letter, with no weight to it at all, no history, just 4 syllables that meant an appointment and a train ticket and a folder full of paperwork. The name hit her like a freight train pulling into the station at full speed. Callaway. Her name. Her son's name, in a stranger's mouth, in this crowded, echoing, indifferent hall, spoken by someone who had absolutely no idea what it meant. To him it was only a sign on a building. That was all it had ever needed to be, and there was something almost unbearable in that, in how ordinary her private catastrophe sounded when it came out of somebody else's mouth as directions. Vivian swallowed hard. Her tablet screen had gone dark in her hand without her noticing, the announcement chime for a departing train somewhere behind her sounding suddenly very far away, as if the whole hall had tilted slightly and she was the only one who'd felt it move. She could feel the small wooden train pressing against her ribs through the lining of her coat, the way it always did, except now it felt less like a comfort and more like a hand pressed flat against a bruise. "I know exactly where platform 14 is," she said, and her voice came out strange to her own ears, rougher than she meant it to, lower, like it belonged to someone standing just behind her. "Let me walk you there." To understand why those 5 words mattered so much, you have to understand who Desmond Okafor was and what it had already cost him to be standing in that station at all. Required a referral 3 states away, a fact that had come to define the shape of Desmond's entire adult life without him ever quite choosing it. Their local cardiologist had done what she could for years: medication adjustments, monthly monitoring, a defibrillator vest Aaliyah hated wearing to school, and had, on more than one occasion, tried to hide in her backpack instead of putting on. But 6 months ago her ejection fraction, The measurement of how efficiently her heart was pumping had dropped low enough that her doctor sat Desmond down in a small beige office and told him plainly, gently but plainly, that it was time to get her evaluated somewhere that specialized in advanced pediatric heart failure, somewhere that could tell them if a transplant was going to become necessary and how soon. Desmond remembered very little of the rest of that appointment except the specific, useless detail that there had been a stress ball shaped like a heart sitting on the doctor's desk, and that he had picked it up without asking and squeezed it the entire time she talked, and that nobody had told him to put it down. The best program within reach was in Portland, the Toby Calloway Pediatric Cardiac Center. Desmond didn't know who Toby Calloway was. He didn't need to. All he knew was that his sister needed to get through that building's doors, and he was going to find a way to make that happen no matter what it took. A resolve that had settled into him that afternoon with the same quiet, immovable weight as the decision, for years earlier, to become her guardian in the first place. It took him 5 months to save enough for 2 coach tickets and 3 nights in the cheapest motel he could find near the hospital, a place with reviews that used the word clean more often than seemed reassuring. He sold his car, the one he'd used for rideshare driving, and started borrowing a coworker's on weekends instead, splitting gas money for the privilege. He picked up every extra shift the diner would give him until his hands cracked from the dish soap and the grill grease, until his manager, a tired but not unkind woman named Rosalind, started quietly scheduling him for the shifts that came with a few extra dollars an hour without ever mentioning why. He stopped buying anything that wasn't food or medicine. He canceled the one streaming subscription he'd kept for Aaliyah's cartoons and found free episodes online instead, spending 20 minutes some nights just hunting for a working link so she wouldn't notice the difference. The night before they left, after Aaliyah had finally fallen asleep with the one-eared elephant tucked under her chin, Desmond sat on the kitchen floor and counted out the cash he'd saved in an old coffee tin, the bills soft and worn from handling, some of them so small he'd been saving actual ones and fives for months. $290. That was the entirety of what stood between the two of them and whatever came next, 3 nights of lodging, food, transit around an unfamiliar city, and whatever the hospital's evaluation ended up costing beyond what the state insurance would cover, which, based on the paperwork he'd read 3 times over, was very much an open question. He sat there on the cold linoleum and let himself cry. Quietly, the kind of crying where your whole body shakes but no sound comes out, because his sister was asleep on the other side of a thin wall, and he could not let her hear him break, could not let her wake up and see the one person she had left looking like the ground had gone out from under him, even for a minute. He pressed the back of his wrist against his mouth until it passed. Then he wiped his face, stood up, put the tin in his bag, and finished packing. $290 for a trip that might tell him whether his sister was going to need a new heart. He didn't have a plan for what happened if the money ran out before the answers did. He had decided somewhere around midnight that he would simply figure that part out when he got there, the way he had figured out every other impossible thing for the last 4 years. Vivian didn't need to walk Desmond to platform 14. Her own train left from the opposite end of the station, a full concourse away, and boarding for it would begin any minute. But something in her would not let her simply point and turn back to her tablet. Something about the way that little girl's head had settled against her brother's shoulder, boneless, trusting, the exact angle Toby's had used to fall into when he was too tired to hold it up himself. Something about the exact weight of that kind of tired, a weight Vivian recognized in her body before her mind had finished the thought. "It's actually right on my way," Vivian said. "It wasn't. Let me show you." Desmond hesitated, just for a second, his eyes flicking briefly over her coat, her watch, the tablet in her hand, cataloging without meaning to the sheer distance between her life and his. He wasn't used to strangers offering anything in places like this. In his experience, people in transit stations moved like everyone behind them was also running late for something, and kindness, when it came at all, usually came from people who had almost nothing themselves and understood exactly what nothing felt like. But the woman's face looked genuine, and honestly, he was too worn down and too turned around to say no to help when it was finally standing in front of him. "Thank you," he said. "I really do appreciate it."